Here that we're following. Federal judge accuses Robert Mueller's team of lying to target Trump. Come on, man. That's the Fox News headline. Then we've got judge in Manafort case says Mueller's aim is to hurt Donald Trump. Just a little background. We'll get Newt Gingrich's reaction to all of this. Finally, I would argue at long last, somebody in the judiciary is calling out the Mueller investigation for what it is. This unconstitutional witch hunt in search of a non-existent crime. Now, the federal judge presiding over the Manafort case accused Mueller's prosecutors today of, quote, lying. That's the word Judge T.S. Ellis used today. And the judge also said the only reason that Mueller was pursuing charges against Manafort was to get him to flip on President Trump so that Mueller could make a case of impeachment. Wow. Joining us now, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, Fox News contributor as well. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm doing well, and I must say this is the most remarkable break we've had so far in the entire saga of Mueller's witch hunt. You have a U.S. district judge who said, this is the quote from the Fox News coverage, which I've tweeted out just a few minutes ago myself, because I think it's so important. He says, you don't really care about Mr. Manafort. You really care about what information Mr. Manafort can give you to lead you to Mr. Trump and an impeachment or whatever. Ellis then demanded that they give him the unredacted scope memo, the document originally given him outlining his job. Because, of course, what Manafort did is he went into court and he said, they have indicted me under things that they have no authority to even be looking at. And Elliott went on to say, we don't want anyone with unfettered power. Now, my newsletter tomorrow picks us up and this whole thing up, and I quote somebody you've had on the show, Alan Dershowitz from Harvard, who says that he's totally opposed to anything moving us towards a police state, that this is unbelievably dangerous. I also quote Andy McCarthy, who you know well, who's a former federal prosecutor. He says that Trump should not, under any circumstance, allow himself to sit down and be interviewed by Mueller. And I point out, Mueller cannot get Trump to speak if Rosenstein does his job, because the truth is that Mueller will have to have Rosenstein's approval to try to subpoena Trump.
Well, I think all of that is true, and then we have the conflicts. We know, of course, that it was Rod Rosenstein that wrote a letter, a stinging rebuke, and you talked about it last time. I don't know the exact words, but to paraphrase, that basically the FBI would never recover to its great status with James Comey at the helm. And on top of that, we now have discovered that Rod Rosenstein, he was one of the people that signed off on the FISA warrant application renewal, which was the bulk of information was the unverified, uncorroborated, Clinton bought and paid for dossier with Russian lies. He signed off on it. He didn't do his due diligence when he signed that document. So that conflicts him out a second way. And why Jeff Sessions hasn't demanded he step aside, I don't know.
It's very odd because, as you just pointed out, and I've sent it out and I posted, and I think you posted it, the Rosenstein memo to President Trump, before Comey was fired, is so devastating and so thorough, and concludes, this is Rosenstein now writing it, concludes that as long as Comey's there, they will never fix the FBI. Now, the gap between that guy, the person who wrote that, and the person who's allowed Mueller to run amok is just astonishing to think that the same person could be doing both. And so I'm partially saying here, Rosenstein should say publicly and explicitly, Mueller will never get authority, because he has to get it from Rosenstein. He will never get authority to subpoena the president or to go to a grand jury with the president. There's no excuse for it. And in my newsletter tomorrow, I take McCarthy and Dershowitz and others and lay out the case that the president should simply follow Nancy Reagan's advice and just say no. If
you go further into this federal judge, his name is T.S. Ellis III out of Alexandria, Virginia. This is beyond skeptical here. I mean, for a judge to say that the special counsel is lying, and that's the word he used, and the judge saying the only reason Mueller's pursuing charges against Manafort is to get him to flip. He actually quoted, he said, I don't see what relation this indictment has with what the special counsel is authorized to investigate. You don't really care about Mr. Manafort's bank fraud. What you really care about is what information Mr. Manafort could give you that would reflect on Mr. Trump or lead to his prosecution or his impeachment. I don't think I can recall in my lifetime such a stinging rebuke. And prosecutors are saying on Friday that their investigative powers were outlined in Rosenstein's letter to Mueller in May. And they added that he also had the additional authority that they could not disclose in the courtroom because it related to the ongoing investigation. But then Ellis repeatedly wasn't buying it, characterizing the special counsel's office argument as, quote, well, we said this was what investigation was about what? We're not bound by it, and we are lying. Come on, man. That's what he said. Those are his words.
I think that it's clear that the judge both reached a conclusion about Mueller and his team, and at the same time reached a conclusion that he, the judge, was not going to give unfettered power to some prosecutor to run around and try to make a case if the case doesn't agree, it doesn't exist. So I think the 2 weeks from now, I have a very important moment in that courtroom in Alexandria, because he has insisted that they come in and bring the unredacted memo giving Mueller power, and that he, the judge, not the FBI, not the Justice Department, he, the judge, will decide whether or not that's an appropriate document. And I think this is a huge setback for Mueller's case. Now you have an independent judge who's saying flatly that the Mueller team was lying, which is actually what Giuliani has been saying. It's what McCarthy has been saying. It's what Dershowitz has been saying. And I think that this is going to have a significant impact as this thing evolves over the next few weeks.
Let me read one other line. We don't want anybody in this country with unfettered power. It's unlikely you're going to persuade me, the special prosecutor, has power to do anything he or she wants, he said. The American people feel pretty strongly that no one has unfettered power. I mean, I actually see this case being thrown out. If I'm reading into this the right way, I don't see how this judge comes back and says, OK, well, let it go forward. And then and knowing the special. Listen, we knew this when Andrew Weissman was appointed, Mr. Speaker. I went over his record again and again and again. Even the latest appointment by Mueller, again, another Democratic donor. You know, Andrew Weissman, his so-called pit bull, according to the New York Times, was waiting in anticipation of Hillary's victory at her victory party in New York at the Javits Center that night. A guy that has been excoriated twice for withholding exculpatory evidence. A guy that lost 9-0 in the U.S. Supreme Court, sent Merrill executives to jail for a year to be overturned by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. This is not somebody you would put on any team that would involve anything involving a president of the United States.
Well, that's right. And I think, by the way, what you're seeing now with Judge Ellis is sort of the magic is disappearing from Mueller. And the judge is looking at the facts. And again, I think to have a federal judge in court say to a U.S. Prosecuting team, you are lying, is pretty strong stuff. You say Weissman has a record of this. You have to wonder, why would Mueller have brought him in, except Mueller wanted a bunch of people who were hunter killers who were going to go out there and get the big game, which of course is the president. And I think that Judge Ellis has stripped all of the mystery away from the Mueller investigation and said flatly, your interest is in going after President Trump. Your interest is not in justice. It's not in criminal law. And I think that this is a pretty devastating indictment of Mueller.
I've never seen anything like it. All right. Now, a lot of questions have come up as it relates to whether the president should ever sit down with Mueller. I have a very strong feeling, along with other smart attorneys, that it's a perjury trap. Rudy Giuliani said as much the other night. Your thoughts? Well,
my whole newsletter that will come out later on today cited Nancy Reagan's theme on drugs and just say no. And my whole point to the president is, if you look at the New York Times proposed questions, they are absurd. They asked the president to go back 17 months. And remember, this is a criminal case. This is not some oral history for the library. You have guys in there who want to destroy him, who want him to tell them what he said or what he thought in a particular meeting 17 months ago, at a time when the president of the United States is dealing with Russia, Syria, Israel, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, Iran. Go down the list and say to yourself, I don't think you or I could remember accurately a meeting 17 months ago. And the way these questions are worded in the New York Times version, they're entirely a trap. They're designed to set the president up for either perjury or obstruction of justice. And there are no circumstances where he should agree to go into that room because the whole thing is a trap, and I think they should call Rosenstein's bluff. I don't think Rosenstein then is going to, particularly given what has happened in Judge Ellis's court today, I don't think Rosenstein is going to give Mueller the authority to take the President of the United States and compel him to testify. And I think they ought to push him right up to the wall on that, and if necessary, go into court on it.
Well, I think then it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And Levin was rightly saying it goes against Justice Department, their own policy, their own procedures, past precedents, and certainly take it all the way to the Supreme Court, because if that's what Mueller wants, the type of showdown he wants, then that's the type of showdown he's going to get here. I do think there's not equal justice under the law either. I also think we don't have the equal application of laws. We certainly know that Hillary committed felonies, numerous felonies, obstructed justice. And I think the overwhelming, incontrovertible evidence is they fixed and rigged that case, as Rudy Giuliani believes as well in the interview that he had with me the other night. Then you have the whole issue of the FISA court, where you had Hillary Clinton bought and paid for, foreign national hired, funneled money, paying for Russian sources, Russian government sources, to manipulate the American people, but it's then used as the bulk of information presented in an application to spy on an American citizen, a Trump campaign associate, and they never tell the judge that it's not verified, that it's never corroborated, and they never tell the judges 4 times with 3 subsequent renewals that in fact Hillary paid for it all. What is that? That to me is lying to a judge.
You know, Andy McCarthy had a great line in a recent column. He said, the rules of the game are that the Democrats get away with murder while Republicans get murdered. And in judicial terms, that's exactly right. And he makes the point that the Obama campaign had some FEC violations. They basically settled it with a fine and got rid of it. At the same time, there was a conservative Republican who had a $20,000 violation. They tried to put him in jail.
Yep.
And there's a constant difference between how conservatives and Republicans are treated by the Justice Department and how liberals are treated. And I think that's where it's refreshing to see this judge take them on. And I think that he has certainly begun to puncture the balloon of whether or not this is a fair investigation.
This is the single biggest day since this whole thing started. Somebody that actually seems to adhere to the rule of law, understands what's really going on here, as we've been pointing out. We'll continue more with Newt Gingrich on the other side. Right, as we continue with former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. So the president beefed up his legal team. Emmett Floyd is now on board. Mayor Giuliani is now on board. I don't know if you had a chance to watch my interview with the former mayor, but he had some very strong words for Hillary Clinton. She should be in jail, that James Comey's a pathological liar, that this is a witch hunt and never should have begun. And he was pleading with Jeff Sessions and Rod Rosenstein to do the right thing and put an end to this madness. What is Jeff Sessions doing?
Well, I think this is where the question of whether or not Mueller can actually move towards a subpoena begins to be very real. And I think that Rosenstein is the one who really is in the crosshairs, and that Sessions has to sit down and say, look, you've got to be prepared to stand up and do your job, and if you can't, you need to leave. And I think we're way beyond the point where anything that Sessions said about recusing himself matters, because none of this anymore relates to Russia. And so the reason that Sessions gave, because he was under great pressure, remember, because of the whole Russian question, no longer is valid, and Sessions should reclaim being the Attorney General of the entire department. And the objective fact is that nothing Mueller's doing today has anything to do with Russia. It has everything to do with trying to find a way to get the president either on obstruction or on perjury, and neither of those relate to the reason that you had Sessions originally recuse himself.
What do you think of Rod Rosenstein? We do have separation of powers. Congress has been trying and stymied and stonewalled by the DOJ over subpoenaed materials they've been asking for. And Rosenstein said that he's not going to be extorted. What did you make of that remark?
Well, that's a goofy remark, because the truth is that Congress has a legitimate right to demand the information. And I think they can either subpoena him or they can just start cutting off funding. The Congress is not powerless in a fight with the executive branch. But in this case, It's really strange. You have the Congress trying to get information, and I just saw that the FBI indicated that some information that people were asking for in the Freedom of Information Act, they might be able to get them by October. Now, that's just a deliberate stall. And I think that there's an absurdity going on here, as you know, and I think you're likely to see both the House and Senate Judiciary Committee chairmen take very strong measures to compel justice to send over the material.
All right, Mr.